Hey and hello. Um, Basically, today I'm filming right at the end of Believathon, and as we get to the end of it, I've kind of been inspired to film a video that I have never done before and that I wouldn't usually do. What I want to do today is essentially show you how my reading and reading, especially for things like Believathon, helps to inform my work and how I use it in my day-to-day job. Okay, so to give you a little bit of background, my name is Cassie and I am a teacher that teaches at a local community college that is focused on further education. So I teach sixth form, so like age 16 to 19, and sometimes we teach adults. This year I will have my first full adult class as well, which is very exciting. The subject I teach is English. I actually teach and focus on English language. But I don't teach the A-level course, which is what we usually see at 16 to 19. Instead, I teach the GCSE resit course. So for those of you who aren't through the UK or who aren't familiar with the new style of GCSEs, the GCSEs now are done on a numerical rating system. And if you do not achieve a grade 4 in that numerical rating system, which is the equivalent of a C, you are required to resit it again until you are either 19 and also full-time education, or if you have an EHCP or anything like that, you're required to sit it until you're 24. So it means that the students I deal with have already experienced going into the GCSE and not managing to achieve that grade 4 level. What we tend to find is most of the time the reason they haven't achieved that grade 4 level is either because they aren't big readers, they're reluctant readers, they might not have picked up a book at all since school or outside of what they were forced to read in class. They might not have access to books and things like that, and they don't find the same enjoyment that I find in reading. And this tends to lead to the students sometimes struggling to understand how to access a text fully, and then how to utilise it, and how to open themselves up to the skills that they can get from knowing how to read completely and how that can help inform their writing. So that brings me on to the actual video for today. Now, I teach English language, and in the UK the way English language works is completely different from the way English literature works. There are no set texts, so there's no Shakespeare, no Dickens, none of that. There's no book that they have to know going into the exam or anything. It's actual, and no poetry or anything. It's actually a closed exam and unseen text. So they'll do the first paper, which is focused on fiction, and they will be asked to read a short fiction extract, answer questions on it, and then they will be asked to write a piece of fiction themselves. And then in the second exam, it focuses on non-fiction, so they read 2 non-fiction extracts, and then they are asked to write a piece, or 2 pieces in my case, of non-fiction themselves. Because of that focus, it's really important that I try and find as many texts as possible to show variety of texts, because the exam board could pick anything. They also have to be of a certain quality because the exam board is going to use a certain style of text for these students. And we have to get them used to variety and range. It's about learning how to read and the skills applied rather than learning about one specific text. And that brings me on to today. So as most of you will be aware, Believathon is a middle grade readathon that Gavin from How to Train Your Gavin organised. It's fantastic. It's raised massive awareness of how good middle grade books are, especially for people who are actually older readers. And it's also done a really great thing for the teaching community, where lots of teachers have become involved, have started doing readathons with their classes and so on. But I found that the majority of those teachers are actually younger. And I wanted to bring you something a little different, where this is how I would use a middle grade Believathon text with my class who are 16, 17, 18-year-old students. The text that inspired me to do this was A Pinch of Magic by Michelle Harrison, which I read for my first book of Believathon this round, so the second round of Believathon. And what I wanted to show you was a resource that I made and explain how we would use that in class. Okay, so for this part of the video, you'll see me here, but I'm looking down at the resource, and you'll see the resource hopefully pop up on this part of the screen. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is looking at an overview of Michelle Harrison's Pinch of Magic, and the theme that we focused on is the idea of witches and witch hunt. So we have an opening slide, and all I've done here is take what our typical images are of witches so that we can kind of get that idea into students' heads. Why are witches portrayed this way? What do we usually think of them, and what connotations do we have about witches? And then we can look at the idea of witch hunts and start to put that theme into their mind. Why might someone be accused of witchcraft? What is the result of being accused? Okay, so this is the big bit. Now, the main part that I've taken to look at this text is the actual prologue of A Pinch of Magic. We're looking at a girl who has been trapped in a tower room. We're aware that she is there because something has happened. She's being punished. In fact, we find out that she's going to be going to her death. She's powerless here, but we don't know what type of power it is. What we do see is that people are definitely scared of her, and people are definitely feeling fear. So what I would do is I would read this part of the text with my students. We read it through one, and then we'd have a bit of a discussion about it. So there's some questions at the bottom that I use to guide them. And then we would focus on two main questions. So it is vital that for my students, they learn how to read critically and analytically. But what I tend to find is that my students, being reluctant readers as well, they really struggle with this aspect. So the reason middle grade is so good to use for this is because it is written in a simplistic manner, but it still has enough content. You still have the ability to analyse it to such a massive degree. It's incredibly clever, although the structure and sentence structure remains simplistic enough for people to understand it more fully, which is something I appreciate. So one of the first questions I've asked my students to focus on is, how is an intimidating and ominous atmosphere created? So we will look here now at mood and setting and how the tone is created through the use of the words by Michelle Harrison. In particular, for example, she uses the word cage, which reminds us of being trapped in a closed environment, the idea of no freedom being ominous and intimidating. The cruel wind and the word whipped, which is violent, harsh. And we would take my students through this. They might not think of it as one thing, but they do know what the word whipped means. They do know what the word cruel means. They know how it would feel to be in a cage, and it starts to lead them in to reading these texts more fully and really understanding how a writer puts these things together to create this sense of dark and intimidating atmosphere. And then at the last bit where it says, this is the last thing she would write, which is obviously an ominous tone. We know what's going to come next is going to be bad. The other question that we would focus on here is, what impression do we get of the woman? Figuring out impressions of characters, I mean, it's something that I find that students at my level really find difficult. They either tend to tell me things they learn about the people, so like the age or something, and then they'll say something, we get the impression she's young, but they couldn't extend that necessarily to the fact that she's naive or the innocence or anything. And that's really what we're trying to guide them to do. Similarly, these are skills they use every single day. We all get impressions of people, first impressions especially, and we get an idea of what people are really, really like, and yet when they read a text, it's like they forget what it feels like to walk down the hall and go, oh, she looks mad, she looks stern, she looks angry. And so it's trying to do that, trying to lead them in to how you can do that through writing and basically becoming a critical reader. So in this part of the text, we're looking at someone who is caged. They're being held. So that would give us the impression that people done something wrong. Maybe the impression she's trapped. Even the impression that she's somehow like, almost like a wild animal that has to be contained. Because it's not just calling it a cell, which you associate with human punishment. It's a cage. And that's quite animalistic in its language choice. Similarly, we get the impression that she's been treated harshly and bullied. She imagines that the crows that were once, or she once saw as friends, become kind of like accusing and mocking, repeating things, the voices of the villagers, things that she's heard said. So that gives us the idea that she's been bullied and tormented by the village, and we start to get an idea of why we are here, or what may have happened to her. We also get the idea that she's hopeless. She said when she still had hopes of escaping, and I will guide the students here to make sure they're focused on the idea of still had hopes. Like, they're no longer there when she had them. That's what she was thinking, but now they are gone, because those kind of close readings are something that they find a little bit difficult to do. The fact that she hides the stone within a crevice in the wall shows that she's clever and could be a devious character, so we start to see some differences in her character. So I tend to find, with my students especially, that things that I kind of take for granted when I read, I instantly get these impressions, I instantly understand the mood they struggle with. They kind of just see words on a page sometimes, and they understand it more when you read it to them, because you can add tone and emphasis where it's appropriate. But that depends on my having been able to process and read it in the first place. For them, when they are reading it outside of that, a lot of the students that I teach will struggle with this aspect. And so a text like this and being able to go through it in this detail, something that feels achievable to them, but is still clearly full of things to analyse and so clearly complex in its use of vocabulary and the way that the phrases that have been used, will make them feel like it's more accessible and hopefully teach them how to do this initially. From there, I then take the students through the extra little part of the text, which is where we learn a little bit more about what has happened and what is going to be happening to the girl that is in this tower. So now we'll ask about opinions of the woman. Have they changed? Did we feel sorry for her before? Do we not feel sorry for her now, and why? And that leads into one of the hardest skills that our students have to learn, which is the skill to evaluate and judge. The way that the exam works, at least for paper 1, is usually that you are given some kind of statement and you're asked to make a judgment about that part of the text on that statement. Here I have asked my students to how far do they agree with the statement that the writer has created a fearsome and dangerous villain who is mad and bent on revenge. So here they have quite a lot to deal with. Is she fearsome and dangerous on one hand? Is she bent on revenge on the other hand? Or do we feel sympathy for her? Do we feel like it's justified? Can we really call her a villain per se? At least at this point from what you've read. And that's what we deal with here. So you can see like the answers section that I've done is split up into evidence that she's fearsome and dangerous. So she's the March witch. She killed 3 of their own. There's deep gouges in the walls and she's thrown things, so clearly there's some danger there. People are scared of her, the warders are scared of her and unsettled. Is she bent on revenge? Well, she's written the single name, so she's clearly focused. She says she didn't want to harm anyone then, but she's clearly changed her mind now. Revenge was all she can think of, so that is like the writer is telling us, look, she's highly focused on revenge here. That's all she wants. She's the bad guy in this situation, at least now she is. And then the counterpoint, because I found that character, which I'm not going to spoil it, so I found the character of this woman so sympathetic by the end. that I wanted to make sure the students can recognise the counterpoints here that are so cleverly put into the first chapter. It's repeated that she never meant to hurt anyone, so just because the result has been this, it wasn't purposeful, and that's important. Intent matters. That she's looking at who had wronged her. So yes, she might be getting revenge, but there's a reason to have got revenge in the first place. People have done wrong here. And then finally, the accusing, the mocking. So we're leading back to this idea of a village being against her and rumour mongering. Okay, so that's kind of where we go with the reading part of this. You can see how so quickly and so simply such a wonderful magical text like this can be pulled and analytically read and criticised and critiqued, and really it's full of beautiful language. It's incredibly well constructed, the atmosphere is intense, and the characters just from the first couple of pages are so nuanced that it's important that you see that when you're reading. So I loved making this resource for these students. Now from that, I've extended that to start to look now at the writing section. So we now look at the idea of, the images. So this girl is going to the gallows, we've got a tower there. Think about the atmosphere, how can you build it in? Look at the words that were used for atmosphere, what words could you use? And then we've got a section on describing characters. Now, I adore this. So I took very small snippets of the descriptions of Granny, Fliss and Betty Widdershins, and I just wanted to use them so much. So with Granny, it's focusing on the idea of her smell and how her smell adds familiarity to Betty, how she feels safe because she's smelling this familiar scent. And I've asked the students to think about a scent that links them to someone in their family, someone that they love. So potentially it could be the smell of their grandma, it could be the particular nasally tone of an uncle or an aunt, or it could be a sound that they always hear and associate with that person, like a piece of music, the smell of certain cooking, or it could be like the warmth of a hug or something like that. Similarly with Fliss, here we're focusing on the idea of movement and different ways you can describe that. So what's really good is people, I think, get a misconception that they think kids' books, while they are simplistic, are simple, and they are not. Particularly with this book, the movements described so well. It's not her hair moved, it's not she walked, and things like that. We get descriptions like her hair swished over the side, or people trudge and push and jostle, and the language is incredible. So this is to try and encourage students to use different words to describe movement. And then finally, we learn a little bit about Betty Widdershins, and the idea is about the tone and how she's introduced and trying to create a little bit more of a narrative voice in the story. I think one of the most exceptional things about Pinch Magic here was Betty Widdershins' narration. She was great. I loved her as a main focus. So the narrative voice was really strong. I've then focused on something to do with atmosphere and mood. So again, taking another short section just to get the students focused again on how the atmosphere has been created, this time over the marsh. The things like the temperature plummeted, the fog wrapped around it, and it just, the screams and gasps of people, it just adds so much to the text immediately, and I want them to start thinking about that. And then finally moving on to setting. So with the setting, I focused on the Widdershin sisters being taken back into the Poacher's Pocket Inn. And moving through the doors of it, I think we've all been in a busy room, a busy pub, a busy club, especially my students who are of an older age as well. So they've been to parties, they're used to busy gigs and things. And so this is something they can identify with, what it's like when you walk in that room, the heat, the way you move through the press of bodies, the smell, the way the lights fall. And so we look at that. How would you describe that in as few words as possible, but setting the scene extremely well? And then I wanted to look a little bit a scene that has a bit of action in there too, where the environment is dangerous. And so we have a couple of the characters who are coming out of the cave called the Three Widows at one point, and the danger there, and how the waves are crashing around them, and there are jagged rocks. So by the end of this, what I would want them to do is either write something where it's warm and inviting and they're going into a busy place, or looking at a ghost story or something like that, where they can use the tone and the atmosphere and the setting to really create this dark, spooky text. Okay, so this is where I now have a further text of it. Using the themes that are presented in A Pinch of Magic, this idea of the witchcraft, the rumour, the idea of being on the outside, bullied, and so on. I've then taken a very short piece from someone's testimony during the Salem witch trials, where they describe what happened to them as a witch, and it's part of their accusation. The students will then go through this, the type of words, the things that happen to it, and then think about whether they have ever spread a rumour, been the victim of a rumour, and how people react and how they feel and so on. And then they'll think about possibly writing a story with the title The Rumour. Finally, the last bit we need to do is kind of link it to their other paper, which is their non-fiction paper. So what I've looked at here, and this is something that I find, it's because I'm teaching 16, 17, 18-year-olds, it's vital that I link something like this to things that are happening in the everyday world, things that they will be familiar with, and things that they may experience or read or see around them. And so the last bit that I've looked at is an article about whether witch hunts have stopped. And this article focuses on the treatment of women, especially women who are either powerful or sexualized and so on, and essentially looking at victim blaming and how the rumour mill starts and how people can end up punished, or how rumours can spread very quickly, how people how teenage girls can be deprived of sleep through constant texting, and how it can change their own image of themselves because they're told repeatedly that they are one thing and not another. And it's a very powerful text, and it also, I think, massively relates to the ideas that are presented in A Pinch of Magic. Finally, asking students to think about social media and whether it causes more issues or whether they believe it's always been there, with this, reference to historically the witch hunt, and is it just that social media makes it a little bit easier for people to continue to spread these rumours? No. Okay, so that is the resource that I made based on A Pinch of Magic. I absolutely loved and adored making that resource. It allowed me to really spend more time with the text, to delve into the world much further. When I initially read books, when I'm just reading them for booktube and for me and for fun, I do read critically and I will post-it notes throughout, but I read it with pure enjoyment in mind. When I then see something where I go, okay, now I can use that for work, you can see how closely you can then delve into it and read it more. And I thought this would be like just a bit of an interesting video because it's kind of like a how I annotate my book style video, but this is why I annotate them, why do I look at that in that detail, and how do I now use it in my everyday life. So that's the kind of thing that I would then use and take into my role at work. Okay, well that's my video from me today. Now what I've got to ask you, if you've managed to stick with me this far, are there any books or texts you think would be perfect to use within my classroom? There are reluctant readers between the ages of 16 to 19. There are people I've got to get to enjoy these texts. They don't want to be there. The government has made them be there. So we do anything we can, whether fiction or non-fiction, to really make them enjoy it. And the biggest struggle with this is we don't have time to do a whole book. I only teach them twice a week, only 3 hours, and they're focused on a test and resit. There's so much to get through. But genuinely, we don't have time to read a book, and the extracts they use, they have to be under like 90 lines long, which is why the prologue is all I've used from this. So can you suggest anything? Is there anything that you think I've missed that would be great for me to use in class? Full of atmosphere, full of character, full of relationships is great. If you like this video, please leave a like, and I'm hoping to make a bit more content like this, so if you would like to see more of it, subscribe. I look forward to seeing you soon, and I hope you have a great week. Bye.
Toss a coin to your librarian, oh stories of plenty, oh stories of plenty, oh. Toss a coin to your librarian, great tales of humanity. Oh.